We've got investors freaking out about the big stock market losses over the last 10 days or so. The Dow did lose about 900 points yesterday. I don't think this has really spooked Main Street yet, however. But do you think this is going to put pressure on President Trump to enact some new policies or change some existing ones? Do you think he's taking any pause from this?
I think this is complete overspeculation by Wall Street and all of these traders. This entire stock market is overspeculating on something that hasn't even happened yet. And this really predates Trump. This overspeculation, I think, has been plaguing our stock market for probably over a decade. And what you see is them reacting to a doomsday scenario that hasn't even happened yet. I mean, tell me we're 6 and 8 months into the tariffs, and let's say consumer spending is down. Let's say profits and earnings are down at some of our top companies. Then I'm more willing to believe that there'd be a sell-off, or I think it would be fair to start seeing a sell-off. But we're not even there yet. And I think all that President Trump is saying is, look, let's see what happens. I think my policies are going to work. I think we should give him time. And I think Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent put it best, because, you hear all these people saying, oh, the American people aren't going to want to pay for more goods, or tariffs are going to increase the cost of goods, and that's just going to destroy the entire economy. The stock market's going to come tumbling down. Treasury Secretary Bessent said, look, the American dream is not about access to cheap plastic goods. It's not about having the cheapest goods around the world. And what does he mean by that? Well, I think if you go back to several American generations of years past, Americans who are alive today lived at a time where, yes, technically speaking, they paid more for goods and services relative to the rise in inflation than many Americans are paying today. They made less money compared to Americans do today. Yet you look at things like home ownership. You look at the fact that past generations were able to raise a family of 4 on a single parent income. So quality of life was in some ways arguably better, and we paid more for goods and services. So I think what this is going to come down to, and we'll have to see, is are the American people going to be willing to pay more in goods and services if there are measurable improvements in other aspects of their economic lives? And I think the answer is yes. The question is, will we see those improvements? Will we see other areas of the economy, tangible, measurable areas that everyday people can experience, will be improved with maybe a 10, 15% increase in the cost of certain goods and services? I think the American people will be willing to put up with that. I think we just have to see what those measurable improvements will be.
Yeah, and I think also don't forget, there's another thing hurting the markets right now, which I talked about I started to tell this audience just a few weeks ago. There is a massive bubble in AI spending. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not a Luddite. I know AI is coming and AI is already here. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm not calling it the CB radio of the 2020s. But there is too much money that has been invested in it. It's not as expensive as some of these companies were saying. And that's actually what started this market downturn, not the talk of the tariffs and not the recession fears. All right, let's move overseas now. Eduardo, we've got Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky now in Saudi Arabia. He showed up yesterday for some pretty high-level peace talks. And we also have White House envoy Steve Witkoff saying Zelensky sent an apology letter to President Trump a few days ago. So are we on the right track now, or is this just the beginning of a very, very long process to end this war, and we shouldn't get our hopes up about anything in the next couple of months?
Well, Zelensky's got his tail between his legs, and rightfully so, after that debacle in the Oval Office. Now, my concern here is, or really I think the concern from the Trump administration, which I know they see right through this, is that Zelensky is going to say things like this. He writes this apology letter, which is great. It makes him look weak in the media. He probably knows that, actually. But this isn't the first time we've seen Zelensky sort of U-turn or at least pivot during these negotiations since Trump has taken office. So I wouldn't really trust what Zelensky says. I would watch his actions over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. Because, when you look at that Oval Office meeting, that was the third time, I think, maybe the fourth, that Zelensky had indicated that he was going to sign the minerals agreement before he backed off from it. So again, is this apology letter, is this attempt to make goodwill with Trump, is this another one of those instances to maybe bring the U.S. in a certain direction and then basically waste our time in negotiations for another week for him to go back to his original position? We don't know. And that's why I am more and more in favor of the United States really dealing with Russia on this issue. There are those who say, well, Ukraine has got to be at the table. Well, how serious is Ukraine here? I mean, how delusional is Zelensky? Is he going to be a Zelensky at the negotiating table that thinks he can still win this thing, that he can get all his territory back? Because if that's the guy he's going to be, we don't want him at the negotiating table. He's wasting everybody's time. So I don't think it's incorrect for the United States, for President Trump, for Marco Rubio, for Steve Witkoff to want to conduct their own negotiations separate of Zelensky. Then we can bring Zelensky in at a later point and see how serious he really is. So as of now, I think the apology letter is funny. That and much more is deserved, honestly. But I think President Trump ought to keep Zelensky at bay here, not take the bait, and really say, look, you had your chances, 3 strikes, you're out. We're going to deal with this from here on out, and we'll let you know what we come up with.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the safer play, although I think the fact that Europe couldn't come up with an agreement a couple of days ago to actually help Zelensky, maybe making him a little bit more contrite and less of a showboat. Eduardo, that paragon of justice and sanity, New York Attorney General Letitia James, who still thinks attacking Donald Trump with baseless cases is a form of public service. Well, she's now going to bat for the leader of the blatantly illegal anti-Semitic riots at Columbia that are masquerading as protests. Now, a federal judge is also trying to temporarily pause the Trump team's ICE arrest of that man and his deportation process. Eduardo, is there any policy people like James won't oppose if President Trump supports it? I don't think there is, but this is just an anti-Trump play, isn't this?
It's an anti-Trump plan. This is a great story. There's so many angles and so many facets to this story. You have the left and the media freaking out over this, obviously, claiming that they support free speech. You even have some people on the right who are against this for other reasons, against the deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, which maybe we can get to in a minute. But I want to deal with the left here in the media, right? So if you follow this story in the past few days, you will see that all of a sudden there's this newfound appreciation and this newfound concern for the First Amendment and free speech in the United States. You have people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar lecturing the rest of us about the First Amendment and what needs to be done to protect it in this country. I'm not going to allow these people, and neither should your audience, we should not allow these people to lecture us on what free speech is. These are the same people who were fine with locking up grandmothers, people who refuse to wear their masks or appear in protests during COVID. These are the same people who are okay with locking up innocent January 6ers who maybe committed no violence on that day, but simply appeared at the Capitol as a form of protest. These people were okay with locking up innocent pro-lifers who were simply peacefully protesting outside an abortion clinic. And now they want to give the rest of us a lecture on the First Amendment. I mean, when was the last time, as an example, that Rashida Tlaib took up the cause of free speech around the world, where she advocated for free speech rights in Gaza, in Saudi Arabia, in China? So these people don't care about free speech. What they care about is using our values and our principles against us, against the West, to push their own radical agenda. And that's what we're seeing. And then I think at the most basic level, this story comes to this. Imagine you're home. When you invite someone as a guest into your home, what would the reaction be when that guest starts lecturing you about the way you run your household, about what friends you keep, about what policies and what decisions you make outside of the household? That's rude. I mean, we would never allow that. Most countries around the world don't allow immigrants, people who are guests in a country, to act and behave that way. And they shouldn't, and for good reason. And so whether it's your household or whether it's an entire nation, people who are here in this country, and put aside what the law is, okay? I understand that the Constitution does grant immigrants certain constitutional rights. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the feel here, because you see the media arguing that this should be encouraged, right? We should encourage immigrants who come here in this country to protest, or it's a good thing, actually, if they protest our country. And my response to that is actually right, left, or center. I don't care what the immigrant is arguing for, what they're protesting. I'm actually on the record calling out immigrants on the right who are conservative, who probably agree with me, for engaging in political protests in this country, because my feeling is if you are here, you ought to respect the system in place. I don't want to get a lecture from someone who isn't an American, who is here as a guest. And so this Mahmoud Khalil story, obviously there's the broader anti-Semitism, the issue of Israel at play, but forget what he was protesting and what it was about. Let's take it to the very core. And what you have here is someone who is in this country. It's not his right to be here. It's a privilege. And then he wants to engage in this sort of political protest. There's no country around the world that I would dream of going to, including in Europe, by the way, where I'm just going to go as a guest and then engage in protest. I mean, it's offensive. And I don't know why, as a country, we've allowed it for so long. And so when I see the Trump administration deport people, Mahmoud Khalil and hopefully many others, I'm very sympathetic to that. And, I'm sympathetic to it beyond what we've seen in these campus protests on Israel. You look at these anti-ICE protests, for example, where you see people out west in California and Arizona, states like that, they go on these protests and they wave the Mexican flag, they protest our country. And so my thought is, if you're not in this country legally, and even if you are in this country legally, and your reaction is to come here and then protest what we are doing as a country, our government, our policies, the door's over there, and we're more than happy to send you out.
Yeah, and listen, Eduardo, it's more than protest. It's going into libraries and classrooms and disrupting. So this is more than just being a guest in a home and having an argument. It's being a guest in a home and turning off the electricity, taking away your right to shelter.
Even more so. I guess I guess I took it to that level because let's even assume, which these people are all debating in bad faith, right? Again, like I said, they are taking the First Amendment. So let's go to what they're arguing, even if that were the case, which, like you said, this is not. Mahmoud Khalil, actually, I did want to mention the specifics of his case. He was part of a student group at Columbia that put out a statement after October 7th that justified and said by any means necessary, including violence, was okay to resist Israel. That is a statement defending what Hamas did after October 7th. So you are totally right that it's not just coming down to speech. My point here was to engage with those people who are trying to use free speech against us. And my point is, even if it was basic speech protests, which it wasn't, it's still wrong. And this is why I would be against it. And you're totally right that in the case of Mahmoud Khalil and many, many others that we've seen, they are engaging in so-called speech that supports terrorist activity. And honestly, if you're in this country as a guest, maybe don't go out supporting terrorist groups. That would be my thought. So all these concerns, oh, well, he's got a pregnant wife now he has to leave the country. Well, I'm not the one who decided to go to a country that wasn't my own and defend a terrorist group. Sorry.
If you can't do the time, don't commit the crime. And again, exactly right. Blatant civil rights violation. It's one thing to have an encampment on campus, which could be a gray area, but to go into classrooms, go into libraries, that's Title VI, open and shut. I don't care what this judge says. And by the way, the judge may not have jurisdiction because this guy left New York, so the deportation may be on. Eduardo Noret, always great. The Noret Files on Substack. Check it out. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks so much, Jake.